I get a lot of comments asking why Korea was split into the North and the South, and why did North Korea become what it is today? So here's a quick history. Here are the books and reports I'll be referencing, and the articles. And just to first put this into context, these actors are older than North Korea is as a country, so we're talking about very recent history. Before the split, Korea was under Japanese occupation, which started in 1910. It was absolutely brutal. They were forced to give up their culture, many Koreans were enslaved and murdered or made comfort women. It ended after 35 years in 1945 when Japan lost World War II. The Koreans in these videos may look happy, but this isn't a story where good things happen. Liberation didn't mean freedom for the Koreans. Instead, it made them pawns in the Cold War. The US and the USSR split the country in half. The US got the South and the USSR got the North. This was originally intended to be temporary. They were supposed to be trustees over their respective halves until the Koreans were ready to rule themselves under one government. But the Cold War made reunification talks icy, and they went nowhere for over 2 years. In 1947, the United Nations finally established a task force to hold free elections in Korea and establish a new unified national government. However, the Soviets refused to allow the North Koreans to participate. This was basically the final nail in the coffin for reunification talks. And in 1948, the North and the South both formed their own independent governments. The Soviets installed a man named Kim Il-sung to lead the new nation of North Korea, which marks the beginning of the Kim Dynasty. Kim Il-sung is Kim Jong-un's grandfather, for reference. He had served as an anti-Japanese guerrilla warfare fighter under the Japanese occupation and in the Soviets' Red Army during World War II. Once he was installed as the leader, he immediately began consolidating power, killing or expelling any political opponents or adversaries in his way. He was a power-hungry man, and he wasn't satisfied just having the North. He wanted the South too. So after a lot of convincing with the Soviets and China, his army invaded South Korea in 1950, kicking off the Korean War. This was a very deadly and destructive war. The South enlisted help from all over the world, including the US, who carpet-bombed the entire country, basically, and reduced much of it to rubble. Millions of Koreans died, with the North suffering the largest share of casualties. And after 3 years of intense fighting, the South was able to push the North back, and in 1953, a ceasefire was called. This was, and still is, very embarrassing for North Korea. They still to this day refuse to acknowledge that they started the war. They tell their citizens that the United States did, and they refuse to acknowledge that they lost it. In fact, they have a Victory Day parade every year on the anniversary of the ceasefire. And this is the perfect example of just how tightly the North Korean government controls its people, because there were tens of thousands of North Koreans, some still alive today, who fought in the Korean War and know firsthand that they started it and that they lost. But acknowledging it out loud would get them sent to the gulags, so they keep up the lie, and they get honored in these parades every single year for their victories. After the ceasefire was called, North Korea turned its focus to rebuilding the country. And for 20 years or so, they actually were doing pretty okay. Their GDP was slightly higher than South Korea's was during this time. Now, was this because of their great leadership or their economic prowess? No. They were being generously propped up economically by the Soviets and China. But North Korean citizens didn't know that. From their perspective, this was the best and most stable period of their lives, and Kim Il-sung was to thank. He was a brutal, oppressive, authoritarian dictator and mass murderer from the start, but the citizens who weren't murdered had a stable government and had roofs over their heads and jobs and some food to eat. So if you ever wonder why so many North Koreans bought into the propaganda and were so loyal to the regime, this is why. But remember what I said earlier, that nothing good is going to happen in the story? Yeah, this didn't last very long, and soon their country would fall into a catastrophe. Go to part 2.